Hello, everyone. So glad you're tuning in today. We're going to talk all about iron. So if you have any questions about supplementing with iron, this is the podcast for you. We're going to talk about what iron deficiency can look like and feel like, what might lead to a situation of low iron, what typical kinds of lab testing your doctor may request. We're also going to explore the different challenges around supplementing with iron, such as, unfortunately, constipation, and then definitely some gentle options that are better tolerated by most. So my name is Orna Villazan. I'm a naturopathic doctor in Montreal, Quebec. And joining me today is fellow naturopath and wellness ambassador, Dr. Bianca Drennan, who practices in Toronto, Ontario. Welcome, Bianca.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yes, I'm excited about this chat today. So we thought we'd start right off the bat by talking about what low iron can look and feel like. So what might be some common signs and symptoms that might make you think, oh, maybe that's something I need to look at. Do you want to take that one on, Bianca?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's funny because iron and iron deficiency is probably one of the most common nutrient deficiencies that I see in my practice and that I hear about and read about. And it's one of those things that can really be treated quite easily if it's found. But the thing about low iron is that it sort of really starts slowly. Symptoms kind of occur over time. And so you might not notice them at first until they get to a point where you really do notice them. So, but if it's found, it's really easy to solve. If a lot of symptoms of iron deficiency often are things like feeling tired, feeling weak, hair loss, hair breakage, cold extremities, so cold hands and feet, and kind of always being like the coldest person in the room. So it could be like 30 degrees Celsius outside, but you're that person sort of still wearing a sweater.
I'm giggling because I've been there.
Yeah, and like me too. I'm like saying it because I'm like, I'm this person like in the middle of the summer with a sweater on. So and things like headaches, restless legs at night, and also like fatigue during exercise and really a really long extended recovery. So that person that like goes to have their workout and that might take a day, 2 or 3 to really feel back to normal again. Ironically, heavy periods, a lot of people think that, oh, low iron, I must have like less blood and therefore my period's going to be later. It's actually the opposite, because nature likes to do that. And then difficulty with fertility, like with conceiving. And one of the other signs of anxiety that of low iron that I see a lot is actually signs of anxiety. And so in a lot of cases, some of my patients might actually have anxiety, like very full-on anxiety with or without low iron, but sometimes it's actually just low iron because you can get a lot of the same symptoms. So things like chest pain, a rapid heart rate, heart palpitations, where it kind of feels like there's like a butterfly in your chest, shortness of breath, outside of when you're exercising, sort of when you're just sort of either at rest or going for a walk. And then I would say that are sort of a big hallmark symptoms in terms of the sleep and the fatigue is that getting enough sleep, so 7 to 9 hours of sleep, that recommended sleep time, and still waking up really exhausted. That's typically a low iron issue. And then, females that exercise quite a bit, they tend to have low iron. So if you're someone in that category, I would definitely recommend getting tested. And I would say that that patient category rarely has optimal levels of iron. I kind of see like the menopausal patients that have normal levels of iron, and everyone younger tends to struggle a little bit. And then if left sort of untreated, the thyroid can get affected. Because they really work together, and that could lead to more fatigue, weight gain, feeling even colder, more hair loss. And so we know that iron causes all these signs and symptoms that affects all these different systems in the body, but what does iron actually do is the question. How does it actually cause such a wide array of problems? Orna?
I'll take that one on. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, it's quite a list, and it's there for a lot of what you said. It's possible that there's other causes as well. It's not always just iron, but definitely if you've got all of that picture going on, it's definitely going to want to look at it. So how is it that iron has such this array, a large and vast array of symptoms? Is because, well, it's one of our main minerals, our major minerals, and it's really important for our ability to carry oxygen to our cells and tissues throughout the body. So that's why a lot of the signs and symptoms of low iron essentially boil down to not enough blood flow, not enough oxygen to our various tissues. So different tissues will manifest in different ways when that happens, right? So a lot of that is understand why we're so tired. So our red blood cells are important because they're the cells in our blood, red blood cells, that carry our oxygen to our tissues. And more specifically, there's this one molecule inside that red blood cell that actually carries the oxygen, and this is hemoglobin. I think a lot of people have heard the name and don't always necessarily kind of grasp what it is. So it's inside, it's a protein that's inside the red blood cell that carries our oxygen. And we need iron to make hemoglobin. So we essentially ultimately need iron to make red blood cells. So you can see how if there's no iron, then there's no ability to carry oxygen to where it's needed. And that's when we start to struggle with a lot of different kinds of things. Iron's also involved in growth and development. A lot of kids, for instance, who are low in iron can have their growth a little stunted. Your body actually needs iron to make some hormones. This is why the thyroid can get involved a little bit as well. So you can, feel a little rotten, all right, when you're lacking iron. But the question then is, okay, so this is where I'm at. How did I get here? Do you want to give us some of the more common ways that this can happen?
Yeah, so there's sort of three major reasons why you might be low on iron. The first would be not consuming enough iron, and that's either through diet, not consuming enough through diet or through supplementation. The second would be not absorbing the iron that we are consuming, again, through diet or supplementation. And then the third reason would be losing, like losing iron in some way, like through blood loss or using up too much of it. So, and we'll go into some scenarios for each of those. So, in terms of food sources, right? So a lot of people know that, okay, red meat is sort of the best source of iron. And I would argue that it probably is. So things like organ meats, any kind of deeply pigmented red meat. So beef, lamb, pork less so, dark meat chicken a little bit less so. Any kind of game meat is also super high in iron. And that's a source of heme iron. So heme iron versus non-heme iron. I'm not going to go into crazy detail, but heme iron is sort of the animal sourced, readily absorbable, highly absorbable type of iron, whereas non-heme iron comes from plant-based sources, which are things like green leafy vegetables, like your kales and your collard greens, broccoli, legumes, nuts and seeds, and nettle tea, which is a great source as well. Those are all non-heme iron sources, and those are the types of sources that vegans or vegetarians would be leaning more on. And so if a vegan or vegetarian isn't getting enough of those sources, then and they're not supplementing, they're definitely at risk for low iron. Fish and shellfish again would have some heme iron as well, a little bit lesser extent than red meat. So yeah, those are sort of your major food sources. Also, some random ones which I think are super interesting are things like dried apricots, pumpkin seeds, and pumpkin seed butter, which people don't really think about as well. So it's a great swap if you're having like peanut butter all the time. And one of the weirdest ones, and I've known this since I was a kid, is canned or jarred clams. I'm Italian, and so I grew up eating them. My mom grew up making them in like a pasta dish with white wine. They are astronomically high in iron. It's crazy. And most people don't think to eat them, but they're great in different kinds of stews and whatnot.
That's
Um,
interesting. Do you know where that fits? Like, because I grew up eating canned mussels, but canned clams, it's a whole other category
yeah,
for me.
and it's funny because my mom always made it because we grew up eating that kind of stuff. But my mom always struggled with low iron, and she knew that the canned or jarred clams had lots of iron in it. And so
The
whenever I
sales
tell,
of clams are going to go up now.
right, every time I tell a patient to eat canned or jarred clams, they just think I'm really weird, and I'm like, trust me, they're not as gross as they sound. They're actually yummy. Um, so yeah, those are your major food sources, and then low absorption was sort of that second reason for having low iron. So either not absorbing the supplements or with food. So low stomach acid would be a big one, and because we need stomach acid to digest proteins, and so for consuming red meat and hot heme sources of iron and really any kind of food, not just protein, we need digestive enzymes and stomach acid to actually absorb, like break down the proteins and absorb it. We've got low stomach acid, whether that's through taking pharmaceutical drugs, which can sort of inhibit stomach acid production, or high stress, we're not going to be able to absorb the iron that we're actually ingesting. Any kind of inflammatory digestive issues, so things like Crohn's, colitis, celiac disease, gastritis. So any kind of inflammation in the gut would cause an absorption issue from all nutrients, but especially iron. And then a parasite or a tapeworms, those can also cause an issue. Less
You
common.
have any kind of digestive symptoms, really, from gas to bloating to anything, you can kind of assume, okay, maybe my absorption isn't where it needs to be.
Yeah, exactly. And that's kind of goes for all nutrients, but especially iron. Iron's a tough one to actually absorb. And so if you have sort of a condition going on, it's just kind of another obstacle to get over for you to absorb it. Other and there's certain nutrients that can impede and like prevent absorption of iron. So that's like calcium, coffee or tea, any kind of phytates, which are present in some veg, and then tannins like in wine. So it's not to say that you'll absorb none of the iron when consuming these things together, but it is going to inhibit some of the absorption. So if you think I wouldn't be taking an iron supplement and drinking, a cup of coffee at the same time, because you're going to run into an issue there. It's safe, it's just not very effective. And then there's certain nutrients like that enhance absorption. So things like vitamin C, which I think is really well known. Vitamin C is great for the absorption of the non-heme type of iron, so that plant-based source of iron. So really essential for the vegans and vegetarians. Not really as necessary if you're consuming meat or heme sources of iron. Vitamin A and beta carotene help release iron from the body stores to be used. And then things like B vitamins, like B12 and folic acid, are also really part of sort of the iron hemoglobin red blood cell transport system and getting oxygen to the tissues. So oftentimes I have patients that are low in iron are also tend to be low in things like B12 and folic acid, but definitely B12. And they kind of often go together, not always, but they often go together. And that also leads to more fatigue, hair loss, and all those other symptoms I mentioned before.
It just points to how complex our whole physiology is and how many interactions there always. It's never like in this case iron, but there's never one thing that acts on its own. There's always going to be influences, good and bad.
Yeah, I mean, our bodies are essentially like very elegant machines, right? It all really works together in a system. When one thing goes off, the whole machine gets thrown off, right? And there's sort of a cascade of symptoms that come. Um, and then reasons why you might be losing blood or losing a lot of iron would be like a really heavy menstrual cycle, which ironically happens if you have low iron. So it's kind of this self-fulfilling prophecy in a way. Any kind of intestinal bleeding, and then which would be also a concern for so many other reasons. Pregnancy, so you wouldn't be losing blood there, but your body's definitely that fetus is definitely soaking up all of your iron stores. And then heavy exercisers. So it's not to say that you'll lose blood when you're exercising, but people that exercise a lot or very frequently or intensely tend to have to use up their iron quite a bit. And so I find in my patients, those people tend to be lower in iron because their body is just using it for muscle recovery all the time and oxygenation.
Mm.
So yeah, lots of different ways to sort of be low and opportunities to improve iron.
Definitely. So thinking about each of our lifestyles and where some of those things might be playing into it. And okay, then maybe I need to adjust or think about extra iron food sources at this time of the month, for instance, would be a classic. Yeah.
Exactly.
The good news, and you said this earlier, Bianca, is that when you do know that this is an issue, when you do know that you're low in iron, it's actually quite easy to fix. I mean, basically, you take an iron supplement and you're going to start feeling better pretty quickly. Now, it won't necessarily address what led to it, but it'll start helping you feel better pretty quickly. And then ideally, you're also at the same time working at improving what led to the problem in the first place, right? I do want to take this moment, though, to say just because you're feeling tired or you think, oh, maybe I'm low in iron, does not mean you should go and supplement with iron, because having too much, it opens up the door to a whole other list of problems. So you don't actually want to supplement with iron unless you actually have it confirmed that this is your issue. Because we've talked about, you mentioned the thyroid in relation to iron, but you can have thyroid issues that are not related to iron that can also make you feel pretty tired. You can be stressed all the time and you might have adrenal tiredness and issues, right? So there's lots of different things that could be going on. So get it checked out. So how does that look, or what does that look like when you go for your annual checkup with your doctor? And many NDs will do a general annual blood test as well, just to kind of see how things are going. That initial screening test includes two things that give us a little bit of, open up a little window into what's happening with that iron. That's the CBC, which is our complete blood count, And what that is it's a whole slew of tests. You'll see all these acronyms on on the results. And essentially, it's just looking at all kinds of parameters of your red blood cells, how big they are, how pale they are, how filled with hemoglobin they are. They're, all those kinds of factors come in
Like
all
the
those
mature
acronyms.
and immature as well, right? Like
Yes,
mature red
exactly.
blood cells, which are functional ones, and immature ones might, if you have a high level of immature ones, they're not really effective. It's like a kid versus an adult. An adult, I don't want to say is more effective, but can do a lot more than a kid can do.
So you'd be surprised how much information we gain from all those acronyms. And then the other screening test that often will get done is your ferritin, which is kind of gives you an idea of how much iron you're storing, because iron binds to ferritin and it's how we kind of put it aside for when we need it. So if anything in that CBC or your ferritin raises a flag that, okay, something's not right here, your practitioner will likely follow that up with a full iron profile. So they're going to actually start a little more digging in there and actually measuring some parameters around the iron. The challenge, though, and I mean, you see this all the time in your practice, Bianca, right? It's like there's a whole spectrum of, what healthy iron levels are. So what's normal for me might be completely abnormally low for you, or vice versa. And so in terms of statistics of the large population, that's how we determine what a normal range is. You might be in that normal range and it looks good on paper, but you're not feeling well. You've got all these symptoms still going on. There's something underneath, trouble brewing. So if you are suspicious, even if your test results come back, normal, but maybe they're a little on the borderline of what low or high is, then I would suggest you definitely follow up with that. Ask your naturopath, ask your medical doctor to follow up with a full iron profile, and dig into that and maybe have some clarity on some of those questions. And I'm going to get on the soapbox here, and I think you'll probably join me.
Probably.
The way that naturopaths and medical doctors look at blood test results tend to be a little different. So a medical doctor, they're looking for outright pathology or disease. So in the case of iron, they're looking for full on anemia. So like where you're so low in iron that you're not making enough red blood cells, right? And if you're not there, then you're considered okay. An ND is going to look at aiming for optimal health. So we might going to want to adapt or tweak some of your nutrition, some of your lifestyle habits long before the actual pathology develops, with the idea of avoiding that we get to that place. So when it comes to lab tests, we have an eye for optimal levels, right? We're looking at not just, hey, you're within normal range, but no, actually you are, but some of these numbers look a little on too much to one side or another. So we're kind of trying to help find that right sweet spot. And that might change from one person to the next as well. So definitely never hesitate to get a second opinion if you feel any doubts. And well, I'm going to say, ask your naturopath to help you look at that.
Not biased at all.
Not
No,
at
but
all.
it's true though, because and it's true that like you should always get a copy of your results. Like you've said, it's because you might want to have someone else take a look at it, and that's why it's a lot easier for someone else to look at it. But the thing with the iron range, and you kind of touched on it before, is that MDs and NDs, like we agree on so much of health, so much of clinical diagnosis, so much of lab work, but iron and like your ferritin is one of those things that we really differ on, because that range, if you were to ever look at an example of lab work, the range, there's like 200 points or 150 points between what's sort of like the low end and the upper end. And so you could fall on the low end of that range and still be in the normal range, and it's not flagged, right? And it's like, okay, so if you have an iron level of 11 and you're in the normal range, does that actually mean you're optimal and functioning well? Not necessarily. Most of my patients are considered normal iron, but they're far from what's actually functional and optimal. And so I tend to actually supplement at that point, and adjust their diet and lifestyle and things like that, right? More iron is not better, and like you said that before, like we don't want to just take it willy-nilly, but there's that lab range is sort of established a long time ago by a lab, right? We want to make sure that we actually feel good. If we've got symptoms that should be treated, then it should be treated.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So about treatment, why don't you talk about the supplementing and what that's all about?
Yeah, so supplementing can be really easy, but I think it is a bit of a sticky situation for people that have experienced low iron and supplementation before. So, fun fact though, like iron supplementing and low iron has sort of been a thing for a very long time. Ancient times in Greek physicians used to actually put swords in water, allow them to rust over time, and actually get people to drink water that was enriched with like the iron from the swords.
Oh gosh, can you
Or
imagine?
yeah, or water that blacksmiths used to use to like cool hot iron, right? Because like actually iron that they use to like build things and mark things. So that's like a little too old school, I think, for most of us in traditional. Like thankfully now we can just pop a pill or like eat a steak. I don't think anybody would be interested in drinking iron or rusted infused water.
No,
Um,
I'm sure there's other issues there too.
yeah, I was gonna say, I'm sure we should just probably test their like toxicity levels. But yeah, the thing with iron supplementation that a lot of people struggle with is that people tend to associate them with constipation, maybe diarrhea, but definitely more constipation, gas, bloating, nausea often, heartburn, and any kind of like digestive cramping. And so compliance when people get prescribed an iron supplement is very, very low. Like I can't tell how many patients I've had been prescribed iron and just don't take it because they don't feel well, or they have to take it at night before bed because that way if they're nauseous they'll sleep on it, which is not ideal. Like your supplements shouldn't make you feel that way, right? Um, so, but that's the difference between sort of really, really high doses of elemental iron and sort of more highly absorbable sources of elemental iron in a supplement. So, oftentimes, patients are prescribed sort of like a 150 or 300 milligram dose of elemental iron, which you can buy over the counter pretty easily. And that's a lot. The liver can't really process that much iron, which is why you tend to get those symptoms. And so it's kind of an overload for the system. And so what other options exist, though, are things like in Mega Foods Blood Builder, for example. It's a much easier to digest iron made and integrated with whole foods. And so there's none of the constipation issues. There's no nausea. There's no heartburn. There's no digestive issues with it because it's real whole food iron. And there's a yeast bacteria in it to help with digestion. And so it's people tend to do really, really well on it, and compliance is much better. And so it also has things like vitamin C, which we talked about, which enhances absorption of the non-heme iron, and elemental iron is non-heme iron, right? We're not taking an animal source here, so that's why the supplement's also great for vegans and vegetarians. It's got some B12 in there, as we mentioned, which is part of the iron system, and some folic acid as well. All in the base of like whole red beets, which is a great source of iron. And actually, there was a great clinical study done on Blood
Mhm.
Builder. Orna, do you want to mention it?
I will. Yeah, actually, it's an interesting story behind why they did this study because for those who know Dr. Taroni Lodog, she's an integrative physician in the US and also a nutritionist and has like tremendous amount of knowledge and is a huge fan of Mega Food. And so she was wanting to prescribe the blood builder for her patients, but their protocols in terms of, medical protocols dictate that you need to give this much iron in order when someone is low in iron. So she couldn't justify the lower amount that is in a food-based iron with full consciousness and without really knowing is it making a difference. And so she really pushed to have a study done, and Mega Food was able to organize this. So this was done through the School of Medicine at the University of Maryland. And it's one of very few studies that are done on whole food based supplements. I mean, most of the research out there, and it's not just iron, this is nutrients across the board, they're done on isolated molecules, like a very purified form of a specific mineral or iron or whatever it is that we're testing and looking at. And most supplements on the market are prepared with that in mind. They make them out of these isolated molecules, but this is not what our nutrition and our food is like. I mean, when we eat, it's a rich complexity of molecules, and all of these different nutrients are helping each other. Like kind of what we said before, like vitamin C helps iron, there's a blend, and certain things are going to help with our absorption and help the body use it better. But there's very few studies on whole food supplements. So this was really exciting when it came out. What they did is they followed a group of 23 women who were still menstruating, losing their iron monthly, had actual levels of low iron that had been evaluated and tested. So there was blood tests done at the baseline and then at the end of the study, which was 8 weeks later, which I little caveat there is actually a very short period of time to be on iron. I mean, usually you don't get
Absolutely.
retested on average, it's like 6 months later, right? So
Right.
two
Iron's a
months.
slow build.
So these women were asked to do two things. They were taking one tablet of the blood builder, which is 26 milligrams of the elemental iron, and they were kept a diary. Basically, tell us what you feel throughout the week, throughout the 8 weeks. What are your energy levels like? Did you get constipated? Were you feeling nauseous? All of that kind of information. And what came, which was really exciting, and Dr. Lodog was really happy because she's like, now I feel confident as a medical practitioner to prescribe, because the blood tests actually shifted. So we were able to see the stores of iron were increased, the hemoglobin increased, the people who were taking it had good energy levels. There was much less fatigue. In general, they were feeling a lot of their symptoms improved. And best of all, not a single person in the study had any stomach upset or constipation or any of the kind of challenging side effects that you were talking about earlier with typical isolated iron. So this was really encouraging, as from a practitioner and therapist level, it also it helps us as well feel more confident being able to say, like, I know this has worked. I've worked with this for years, but now I actually have a study showing me that there is some, real concrete evidence that this is making a big difference. So that was awesome. Now, at the one a day, and over just 8 weeks, they weren't at optimal levels, right? It increased, we could shift it, but they would need to keep going. And if you are actually anemic and your iron levels are quite low, then you will want to talk to your doctor or your ND about maybe taking more, maybe taking 2, even 3 a day, depending on whether it's needed. That's definitely an option.
Yeah, I'm one of those people that struggles to take regular iron. I'm one of those non-compliant people because I have digestive sensitivities, and so you throw a heavy duty iron supplement on it, and I'm just like, no, thank you. I'd rather not, and then I'll just deal with it. But with the blood builder, it's just like there's just no digestive stuff, and that's a huge, huge thing. Like where people actually, I take it regularly, and my patients will take it regularly, and people are like, okay, and with supplements, like they're not Advil at the end of the day, right? And so you have to take them regularly for them to actually like create an effect and build up that, especially with iron, it takes time to build up, build up your levels, sometimes only as little as 8 weeks. But you can't just take it once and, think it's going to do anything. So if you
No,
can get
no.
consistency, it's great. And yeah, I love it for that reason because a lot of people have that sensitivity.
Well,
Um,
therefore, I mean, if you need to be consistent with something, you definitely don't want it to be causing you discomfort, right?
yeah,
So,
exactly, exactly. So and although like obviously we're focusing on iron here and the blood builder is a great option for it, but as we kind of mentioned, things like B12, folic acid, other nutrients in general outside of iron, but in the iron world can also be sort of low, right? Iron is a great thing, especially if you have specifically low iron. It's great to take on its own. The blood builds are a fantastic option, but you may or may not also have other sort of nutrient deficiencies. And it kind of speaks to that point of like, we want to make sure things are in the optimal range. Maybe your diet's not perfect, whatever perfect diet is, maybe you're busy, maybe you've got kids, maybe you've got a big schedule, maybe you're really, really stressed, or maybe you're pregnant, or you're going through a time of illness or a period of struggle for some reason. For all these reasons, you can sort of be deficient in some nutrients. And in some of those cases, you just need a little extra. And so that's where a whole food multivitamin would be
mhm.
helpful to fill that gap and act as that insurance policy that, you know what, okay, I may or may not be getting everything in my diet today. I may have a lot of stuff going on in my life, but I've got this thing just in case to sort of cover all my bases, right? And going back to that whole food aspect of the blood builder supplement, the mega foods multivitamins are also made from whole food sources. So again, really well tolerated because multivitamins can also cause a little digestive upset, nausea in a lot of people. And so being from a whole food source is a really great option. And Mega Food offers different multivitamins for different biological sexes and ages and stages of your life. So you can find the one that sort of best matches where you're at or what your goals are.
Mhm. That's what I really love. I mean, I do so well on these, like these multis, and like it's that integration of that nutrient with that whole food that's where the magic is, right? And it's a big part of why we can actually take it in and use it so well. So a multi, sometimes people go, oh, really? Like it's boring and I don't feel a huge difference. I'm like, yeah, but that's the point. Helping you stay well, right?
Yeah,
Helping
exactly.
you.
And you really shouldn't feel like you get hit by a supplement, right? Like you shouldn't feel that like, whoa, okay, I'm taking something, right? So um yeah, those are great options.
Gentle, gentle. I think that kind of runs all the main topics we wanted to touch on. Do you feel like you missed anything or
I don't think so. I think it's important to get tested. I think that's a big take home message. Get
Mhm.
tested as well, like really, so that you know what you're doing, and way that also you can track the increase. So you get
Mm,
tested for iron, you take the blood builder or maybe a multi, and then you retest it to make sure that things are going up. And so you can have a good idea of what's actually happening in your body, and you also feel the difference as well.
yeah, definitely. Thank you, Bianca. This has been a great conversation. Hopefully people learned a lot and take home messages there. Did you want to let us know maybe how people can find you? I'd say there's
Yeah. So
probably some
I
interest.
Yeah, I have a website. It's lacuralifestyle.com, or you can probably just Google Dr. Bianca Drennan naturopath and it'll come up. And then there's Instagram. Easiest thing is just to put in my name, Dr. Bianca Drennan. My handle is not matched to my name, but you'll see me there. Just look for the red hair, and you'll see it.
You'll get a bunch of people looking you up soon, I think. Yeah. All right. Well, then I guess we'll end it on this lovely note. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. And definitely write in if there's any questions. We're always here to help.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Bianca. Bye-bye.